How's it going today? I'm going to be looking at who I think the top five point guards of all time are. I'm planning on doing this for every single position, starting with today point guard, and then moving on to shooting guard, then small forward, power forward, center. Just in that order. But without further ado, let's just get into it. So starting with number five, I have Gary Payton. I looked at a lot of lists just to kind of get a feel for how I was going to do this, but a lot of lists didn't have this high nearly. A lot of them had him, like number 10, number 8 and stuff. I put him at number 5 because he's the only point guard to ever win Defensive Player of the Year, and he's one of the greatest defensive players of all time. But fun fact about that year that he won Defensive Player of the Year, he actually beat, in a landslide victory, he beat Scottie Pippen, Dikembe Mutombo, David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, and Dennis Rodman. Some of the greatest defensive players of all time, and he's the only point guard to ever win Defensive Player of all time. So it's not like he just beat out some low tier, low level defenders. He beat out some of the greatest defenders of all time. Not only that, he had a 8-year run averaging over 19 points per game. In his career, he averaged 6.7 assists per game and 1.8 steals per game. He's a one-time champion with the Miami Heat, when Dwayne was in his prime, and he's a 9-time All-Star. So as far as point guards go, he's not a very good passer. Usually, you see point guards averaging like or 6.7 assists per game isn't that bad at all. I feel like if you're a point guard, you should probably average more than that, but 6.7 assists isn't terrible at all. His highest assists per game seasons were somewhere in the 8 assists point per game area, and he did that twice. So really, really good scorer. He had a lot of seasons averaging 20 plus points per game, and one of the greatest defenders of all time, which for me puts him above where a lot of people have him on their list. In my opinion, he's definitely a top 5 point guard of all time. But moving on to number 4, who a lot of people have him as the second best of all time. Like, usually when you hear people say they're top 5 point guards of all time, just off the top of their head, they put this guy at number 2. I have him at number 4. I have Oscar Robertson. He's the first player to ever average a triple-double. He had a 7-year stretch of averaging 28 points per game. He averaged 7.5 rebounds per game and 9.5 assists per game. He had 4 different seasons averaging over 10 assists per game. He's a 12-time All-Star. He's a regular season MVP, and he's a one-time champion with the Bucks when Kareem won the Finals MVP. I really wanted to put him higher. I just decided to go in another direction because of a few different reasons, but it was really tough because Oscar, crazy resume, dude. 28 points per game in a 7-year, or over 28 points per game in a 7-year stretch each season. One of the best passers of all time, one of the best rebounding point guards of all time. It was really hard to put him this low, but I had to, man. Because at number 3, I have Steph Curry, who another person who a lot of people off the top of their heads would say number 2. I have him one lower, number 3. He's arguably the greatest 3-point shooter of all time. I think when his career's said and done, he'll be the undisputed greatest 3-point shooter of all time. He of course his career isn't over yet, so this is all as of today. But he's averaging 23.5 points per game through his career so far. His lowest scoring season was when he was injured, and he still averaged 14.7 points per game, and that was relatively soon in his career. I think it was, let me do some math. It was like second, third season in the career. In his career, it was the 2011-2012 season. So that's the lowest scoring season in his career, where he got injured relatively early in the season, only played a little bit over 20 games in the season. But when he was, out of all the seasons where he was healthy, his lowest points per game was 18. He averaged 1.7 steals, which was actually surprising to me because I didn't know that he was even a good defender at all. I always looked at Steph Curry as a guy who could really just shoot threes and not really anything else. I didn't think he was a good defender at all, but he's actually a pretty good defender. He's had a few seasons where he averages over two steals per game, and career-wise, he's been averaging 1.7 steals per game, which is pretty impressive to me because I really truly did not think that he was a good defender at all. I've always thought that he was pretty overrated. I thought he was just a one-trick pony, but apparently not. So, you know, that's bad on my part for not knowing that, especially since I pride myself on my knowledge as far as the NBA goes this season and the NBA players that we have today. So that's my bad on my part. He averages 6.6 assists per game, which, once again, for a point guard, that's not that many, especially on the crazy teams that Steph's been on with all the incredible scores that he's had. He's had Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, DeMarcus Cousins. Draymond Green isn't really a scorer. He's more of a defender, and I'm not 100% sure how good of a scorer Andre Iguodala was on the Warriors. I know he was a really good finisher on the 76ers, but I'm not sure how good he was on the Warriors. But nevertheless, he's had some really great offensive players to pass to, but he's only averaged 6.6 assists per game. He's a 2-time regular season MVP and a 3-time champion, and still has not gotten the Finals MVP. I believe, I know for a fact Kevin Durant has one, and Andre Iguodala has one, but I'm not sure if Kevin Durant has another one, because out of those 3 championships, he's never had one, and I'm assuming KD is a 2-time Finals MVP. But anyway, he's a 6-time All-Star. But I couldn't put him high on the list because these next 2 guys are just undoubtedly 2 of the best point guards of all time. Number 2, I have John Stockton, which his accolade list doesn't stretch quite as far as the rest of these guys, but he has the most assists in a career. He went on a 9-year run of averaging over 10 assists per game. He averaged 2.2 steals per game, and he had 2 seasons averaging over three steals per game, which John Stockton's a really underrated defender in my opinion. He averaged 13.1 points per game. So he's not an elite scorer, but he's always been at least a decent scorer, if not a really good scorer. And he's a 10-time All-Star. And I, of course, had to put him up here at number 2 because mainly because of the fact that he has the most assists of all time, but also his stellar defense as well, and his ability to score. He's never been a bad scorer. But I couldn't put anyone over this next guy. Number 1, who I feel like a lot of people are gonna agree with me on this. The greatest point guard of all time, in my opinion, is Magic Johnson. Of course, he could play any position, and he has. I've actually mentioned that in a previous video, but he has played center when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was injured, and he could play any other position. That's just how versatile he was. He averaged 19.4 points per game. He never averaged less than 14 points per game, and that one season where he did average 14 points per game was a year after he came out of retirement for 4 years due to his HIV diagnosis. He won an 8-year run of averaging over 10 assists per game each season. He's one of the best rebounding point guards of all time. Career-wise, he averaged 7.2, which does factor into his height, but you can't really, you can just say that about any point guard who's above average height. He's another thing that I want to talk about is his no-look pass, like one of the most iconic moves of all time. Behind the back passes when he can't even see them, just an insane court vision. All these players have really good court vision, but Magic Johnson is on another level. He's literally able to pass it to anybody on the court, and a normal person wouldn't even be able to know that they were there. Magic Johnson was a 12-time All-Star, a 3-time regular season MVP, a 2-time Finals MVP, a 5-time champion, and a 3. Oh, my bad. I accidentally put 3-time MVP twice, but I think I actually might have messed up the hold on, let me check real quick. Okay, my mistake. I put Magic Johnson was only a 2-time Finals MVP, but when in actuality he was a 3-time Finals MVP. I don't know why I put 2-time, but 3-time Finals MVP over while being on the same team as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Almost undisputedly the greatest point guard of all time. He did actually say that John Stockton was the perfect point guard, but Magic Johnson's a pretty humble guy, so That's not to say that John Stockton doesn't even make a case for the best point guard of all time, but I just couldn't put anybody over Magic. But yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say for this video. I suck at ending videos. How do I end a video? That's always what I say. Just that's all I gotta say for this video. Like what do I say? How do I end the video? I don't know. I'm done. I'm done talking. That's how I end it. I'm done talking. That's all I wrote down here, in my script that I spent like insignificant amount of time on. But yeah, what would you change about this list? Who do you think is the best point guard of all time and why? If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate a like and maybe consider subscribing. But yeah, thanks. Have a great day.